Hi, I'm Nigel Pearson. I'm the Math Head, and today we're talking about equations and what they can do to help you. All right, the first question is, what is an equation? An equation is a mathematical formula that expresses two equal terms. Now, that's a lot to take in, but I want you to think of it very simply in this way. Think of two terms and two operators, two numbers on two different sides of an equal sign. Okay? Think of it like 2x equals 10. We all know the x is 5 in this particular example. When you're thinking of equations, I want you to think about a scale. Imagine that you have a scale, and on one side you have 10 pounds of potato chips. And on the other side, you have a certain amount of cookies. Imagine that you and your friend are trading potato chips for cookies, but you two have agreed to trade 10 pounds for 10 pounds. 10 pounds of potato chips are very clearly visible, but now your friend has to decide what 10 pounds of cookies looks like. An equation is exactly that way. There's one side of the equation that you know all of the contents of it. And then there's the other side of the equation. You don't exactly know the entirety of the context. You have to take clues from the fully known side and what very little you have on the unknown side. That's the easiest way to think of an equation. The second thing I want you to know about an equation is that it could get very complicated. There are coefficients, variables, terms, just so many things. But for this simple example, I want you to think about terms, which are numbers, and operators. Operators are like plus, minus signs, multiplication signs, division signs. In a later video, I'll explain to you what operators are, but just for now, think of plus sign, equal sign, etc. Terms, in their simplest form, are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, x, whatever. You can add variables in, but they don't have to include variables. All you need are numbers and signs. That's all you need for now. When you're thinking about equations, I want you to think about a sentence. Yes, that's right, a regular sentence. I go to the store. When you're thinking about equations, I want you to think of terms like nouns. Terms are like the content of the equation. When you think about operators, I want you to think about verbs. When there's a verb in a sentence, it tells you an action of what you should be doing. An operator is actually very similar. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. An operator tells you what to do. Add something, subtract something, multiply something, divide something. That's the easiest way to describe an operator and a term or a number. Think of terms like nouns. Think of operators like verbs. This will make solving equations a lot easier for you. The next part of the equation that I want you to think about is the variable. Many times when you see a variable, it's an X or a B or some sort of alphabet, and the number is really unspecified. When you're thinking of variables in an equation, I want you to think about a sentence. And whenever you think of a variable, I want you to think about a blank. Have you ever taken a test and there's a multiple choice answer and there's a blank answer and you have to decide whether it's A, B, C, or D? That's very much like a variable in a math problem. It's the answer and you have to figure out what it is. Now, do you remember our scale example with the 10 pounds of potato chips and the 10 pounds of cookies? Imagine that each cookie weighs 1 pound. So you have to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cookies. But in order to figure that out, you have to figure out how much the cookies weigh. You have to put some on, take some off. That's what it's like to work with an equation. When you're working with equations, you're going to get it wrong on many, many, many tries, but you will eventually figure out what you're doing. And that's the balance of working equations. Here's the last part of the equation I want to explain to you. Coefficients. Do you remember our example, 2x equals 10? If we do simple math, we know that x is 5. But if you hadn't solved that, you wouldn't know what x meant. The 2 in this example is a coefficient. I'm not going to go into the details of what a coefficient is, but it's easy if you think of a coefficient as a hint. Imagine that you have a sentence and the variable is the blank point that the teacher wants you to decide what it means. And imagine there is a word or words around that give you a hint of what that word might be. For example, if I said, I want you to go to blank, the coefficient might be an example of what that word might be, context clues from the rest of the sentence. And in this particular example, the coefficient was 2. I'm the math head. I'm not in the business of teaching mathematics, but sometimes it's necessary to teach mathematics. What I am in the business of is teaching you how mathematics can benefit you in regular life. And now we're about to get into that. So here's the good part. You want to know how equations can help you in real life. Equations teach you to get the results you want by figuring out the unknown. Let's put it in a real life example. Let's imagine that you have a 9-year-old child. His name is Jimmy, and your child has a best friend named Fred. So Fred comes to your house 5 days a week after school, and he eats all of the food in your refrigerator. Why is Fred eating all of the food in your refrigerator? Maybe Fred is hungry. Why is there a child that's hungry? What equals a hungry child? Fred eats a lot of food. Blank equals hungry child. Why is the child hungry? Could it be that his parents aren't feeding him? Could it be that maybe he's not eating because he doesn't like the food? Could it be some other reason? So imagine that you went to the child's parents' house, Fred's parents' house, and you looked in their fridge. The fridge is full. Fred's sister is super fat. She's overweight. So it's obvious that his parents do feed him. So that isn't the answer. Could it be that Fred doesn't like the food? That's also incorrect because Fred eats that kind of food. So what equals a hungry child? So you go to his school to figure out what's going on because Fred eats breakfast and Fred eats dinner, but he doesn't eat lunch. So why is he not eating lunch? We go to school to figure it out. At school, we see 11 other skinny kids just as skinny as him and just as hungry. And we see one kid that weighs 300 pounds. So what equals 12 skinny, hungry kids and one really fat kid? A bully. This kid has been taking Fred's lunch money and 11 other kids' lunch money, and he's been gorging himself. Do you see how that works? You had an end result that you needed to figure out how it got there. You had some information, but not all of the information, and you ruled out the fact that his parents were not feeding him. That's incorrect. You ruled out the fact that he doesn't like the food. That's incorrect. And eventually you figured out that he does like the food, his parents are feeding him, but his lunch is being taken by one kid, and there are other kids that can verify that. Do you see how that works? An equation is just a stupid set of numbers that your teacher forces you to do. But an equation teaches you to look at the result you want and work backwards and figure out what's going to give you that result based on your limited information. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'm Nigel Pearson. I'm the math head. And if you like the content of this video, make sure to like, subscribe, send it to your friends, and all the good stuff.